What's up, YouTube? Before we get into this hand history review, I'd like to go over a concept that I think is really important in the ever-changing landscape that is the poker world. Obviously, to this day, No Limit Texas Hold'em is still king of the hill. It is the game that most people know and most people play, but I think we're beginning to see a divergence as games such as Pot Limit Omaha, Big O, and even Short Deck are becoming more and more popular. I'll oftentimes have people come to my channel and say, hey, I'm not really interested in No Limit. Please only post hands from PLO, or just the opposite, obviously. Who plays Pot Limit Omaha? We're only here for No Limit. And I think that's a really big mistake. If you are closing yourself off to learning all the other games, then you're obviously also limiting your earning potential. When I first moved to Las Vegas, I was really interested in learning and playing a lot of the limit mixed games. Thankfully, they had them in the smaller limits, and so I was able to play them for fun and also to learn. A lot of the chip porn pictures that I posted on my Instagram are actually from these exact games. They really reminded me of why I first got into poker, which was learning new games on the fly, thinking on my feet, and having fun. I think that concept has kind of been lost a little bit. Back to this idea of obviously being able to learn as many games as possible. When COVID first broke out, I saw that most of the action on the apps was in No Limit Hold'em. As the crazy action players begin to go broke in those games, all of the action moved on to Pot Limit Omaha, which then also moved over to 5 and 6 card PLO, as well as Big O, which is 5 card high-low. If you yourself were unwilling to learn or try to understand these games, then you were obviously just unable to play in them and also see the edges that were available to you. Obviously, as these new games become more and more popular, generally speaking, the regular player pool doesn't understand how to play them particularly well. And so if you have a better understanding, then you're going to have a huge leg up on being able to make more money. Now, this particular concept that I want to go over is actually from a hand that I played in Big O, which is 5 card high-low. The specific concept isn't particular to high-low. It's actually something that's particularly important in Pot Limit Omaha as well. It's also obviously important as No Limit too, but I think you're going to see that it affects hands in 4, 5, and 6 card games much more significantly. So let's jump into that hand history and go over that idea.
Before we start, I'll quickly explain that Big O is 5 card Pot Limit Omaha high-low. That means half the pot will go to the best high hand, while the other half will go to the best low hand, assuming that one can be made. A low consists of 5 cards 8 and lower that are unpaired. As an example, on a board of Queen, Jack, 10, 8, 8, there aren't 3 cards 8 or lower, and so there isn't a potential low hand. Whereas on a board of Queen, 10, 8, 5, 6, we have Jack 9 as the nuts for high and Ace Deuce as the nuts for low. In my specific hand, the low isn't of importance, although the concept I want to talk about still applies across all poker formats, and more so in the 4, 5, and 6 card varieties. Just like in Pot Limit Omaha, you must use 2 cards from your hand and 3 from the board. However, in Big O, you can use 2 different cards for the high from the 2 different cards you will use to make your best possible low. Good hands consist of aces, deuces, 3s, and 4s with some high cards. You also want to have high suitedness. Some excellent starting hands are Ace, Ace, Deuce, 3, 4 with 2 nut suits, Ace, King, Queen, 2, 3 with 2 suits, Ace, King, King, 2, 3, and so forth. You do not want hands that are in the middle of the deck, such as 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, as they will not make a low and will likely make worse straights than our opponents. It is important to play hands which can scoop, that is, make the high and the low. In this hand, I get dealt Ace, 3, 5, 7, 8 with 2 suits. As we have 5 cards 8 and lower, our hand can make some good lows and two-way hands. If the flop comes high, well then we can get out of the way. I open to 3x and get calls from the button and big blind. We go 3 ways to a flop of 10, 9, 6 rainbow, flopping us to the nuts with a backdoor low draw. The big blind checks to us and I decide to bet full pot. Since we do not have any redraws to full houses or higher straights, I want to charge the maximum against hands that can beat us. The button folds and now the big blind 3x's us. When he does this, it is blatantly obvious he has a straight as well. Now, many people's gut reaction might be to just go all in and let the cards fall where they may. This is a mistake for a couple of reasons. The first is that we do not have any redraws and still have a lot of big blinds left to play for. Our opponent can easily have the same hand with the potential to make a full house or higher straight. By calling and playing the hand in position, we give ourselves a number of options as the board changes. Now that our opponent has announced his hand to us, we can play nearly perfectly going forward. If the turn card pairs the board and he checks, we can now try and bluff him off of a chop. If he continues to blast, well then it is likely prudent to fold, since at best we will be chopping as we know he has 8-7 minimum. If the turn is a deuce and we now pick up a draw to the nut low, we can raise all in and try to free roll him ourselves. I call and we go heads up to a turn jack, which changes the nuts. King Queen is now the best possible hand, and Queen 8 also makes a higher straight. If he were to once again bet large, I would likely fold, as he can easily have a hand like Ace Queen 3-8-7. He now bets 88, which is about 1/3 of the pot. He can still be doing this with Queen 8, and I would argue betting small here with King Queen or Queen 8 would actually be the best play in order to keep in my 8-7. That said, I believe you will find most opponents would just bomb here with an improved hand, and so his sizing tells me that he himself is likely scared and doesn't have the better hands. That said, I think going all in here may not fold out the chops, and he could still have Queen 8 and be scared of the King Queen potential. I call and we go heads up to a rivered king. He now goes into the tank for nearly his entire time bank and eventually checks. Any queen with an ace, king, jack, 10, 9, or 8 makes a better straight than my hand. I think, just as I thought on the turn, he does not have a better straight and is now scared of losing with his own 8-7 straight. It is still potentially possible that he is exactly Queen 8 and is scared of the king high straights made by any queen with a 9, 10, jack, or king, as well as the ace high straight that ace queen makes. All of this considered, I think this is a great spot to go all in and potentially get him to fold not only chops, but perhaps even Queen 8. After some thought, I jam all in for his $310, which is nearly 80 big blinds. He tanks for his entire time bank and eventually folds. I think it's likely we were chopping, but it is possible he had the best hand. As we can see, it is extremely important, especially when playing deep, not to announce our vulnerable hand to our competent and thinking opponents. In Pot Limit Omaha, as well as any other variants where you have more than 2 cards, the changing board is always a threat for our opponent's potential at outdrawing us. In this hand, if our opponent had just called the flop, then we have no real idea what he potentially has. I would likely check back the turn, and now he can put us in a tough spot on the river if he so chooses. Pot Limit Omaha and Big O are complex games where we have to keep our opponents on their toes. Much like in No Limit, we want to ensure that the other players can't be sure of our exact holding. Because of how dynamic the board changing in PLO can be, re-raising dry boards is often an indication of the nuts. In games of incomplete information, one of the biggest mistakes we can make is telegraphing not only the strength of our hand, but potentially exactly what our actual hand is. This concept also applies in No Limit, especially when you are playing particularly deep, say 200 big blinds or more. We can see this exactly play out in a recent vlog of Rampage Pokers, which I've linked above, titled Playing a $16,000 Pot with Kings. In the hand, he decides to limp re-raise kings and gets 3 callers pre-flop. What is an otherwise viable play in certain situations, here he is extremely deep out of position, announcing that he has one big pair. If he is balancing this play with a wider range, then that can be fine, but I'm guessing that's not likely the case. The flop comes 8-7-6 with a suit, and now he's playing a bloated pot out of position against multiple opponents where his hand is relatively defined and his opponents are not. To make matters worse, it's an extremely wet flop which is likely to bring cards that make it even harder for his one pair holdings. Now he compounds everything by betting into 3 opponents with no real plan other than to potentially fold to raises. He gets no real information when he gets 2 callers and decides to once again bet a turned 8, which is a bad card for his range. Once again, getting 2 callers, he is now completely lost in the hand, going to river that changes nothing. Now he checks, a crazy opponent bluffs all in, and another opponent quickly calls with worse. Rampage ends up folding the best hand because he ended up having no real idea where he or his opponents were in the hand. By defining his hand to his opponents, they were able to play in a way that made it extremely difficult for him. The last thing you want to do against capable opponents is define your range to a narrow set of hands, as they'll certainly exploit you on texture changing turns and rivers. Don't put yourself into these situations.
And that is all for this hand history. I hope you guys got something insightful out of it. I'm actually on my way to Las Vegas for a 36-hour quick trip. Never done something like this, so good luck to us. Next vlog will be on that one. See you guys there.